Yeah, I've got it all right.
Right.
Whilst I'm talking, David, I'm going to have to leave at 7:30 to go somewhere else. I'll be in for the start anyway.
I can't imagine what that better offer would be, Alan, but fair enough. Right, we may as well get things started. Good evening, members, officers, and members of the public who may be watching, I think. Welcome to the Select Committee, Wednesday, the 14th of April. We will start with apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies for absence from Councillors Hull and Mercer. And if you don't mind, I'll take a quick roll call.
Thank you.
Starting with yourself, you're here. And then we've got Councillor Brockbank.
Present.
Councillor Brown. No. Councillor Harbron. No. Councillor Jacquin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Morby.
Present.
Councillor Shuttleworth.
I'm here.
Councillor Soloway.
Here.
Councillor Sutcliffe.
Present.
Thank you. And that's it, Chairman. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We've got 2 minutes to confirm for the meeting of the 17th of February. Do I have a proposer and a seconder, or do we have any points we wish to be raised before doing so?
I'll propose him.
I'll second it, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Andy. So, public participation. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak, Guy?
No, we don't have any members of the public this evening.
They don't know what they're missing. So, item 4, declarations of interest. Any members wish to declare an interest on tonight's agenda? Thank you very much. No interest. So, item 5, Cross Council Customer Service Standards. Would you like to? I don't know. It's obviously the Chief Executive is here tonight, Mr. Shevlin. Good of you to join us. Probably missing the football as much as I'm going to be later, but anyway. Who's going to present, Sharon or Paul?
I'm happy to present. Paul's frozen on my screen.
Right.
I don't think he's frozen. He's just not moving very much.
I'm not moving very much. I'm conserving energy, Chairman. I'll just kick off very, very shortly. Sharon's done the work on this, and I'll let her present the various findings that are quite obviously there. Following on from the last scrutiny, Sharon undertook a piece of work across all the services, testing the response time and also checking on what service standards they were working to. And I think one of the key elements is the customer charter that theoretically we have that isn't fit for purpose currently. It was adopted many years ago and badly in need of updating. So this gives us a real chance as well, a real opportunity to work with the services in order to update that charter across all our services. The standards I don't expect to be the same, depending on how front-facing the various services are, but there should be consistency in that overall approach. The recommendations at the end, again, I'll let Sharon deal with. The one thing I would say is I actually see this as an opportunity for your input very much as a scrutiny committee, but also that the lead members work with their own services. And I say that because actually it's the lead members that you will hold to account, whether that be in council at the, can I call it the question time point, or indeed in policy committee when we get the quarterly production of the PIs. And again, one of the recommendations is quite clearly this should form part of that overall suite of KPIs, which council monitors very, very carefully on that quarterly basis. So big thanks to Sharon for the work she's done and that draft charter, which is there in front of you. And Sharon, if you can go into a bit more detail on the work you've done and the recommendations you've proposed.
Okay, I think you've summed it up really for me there, Paul. So the report sets out how we actually conducted the research. So I was very ably helped by members of the business support team. So we emailed all the service managers or team leaders and asked a number of set questions which are set out on the report So asking what are the individual service response times to inquiries, whether they be phone, letter or email for both internal and external, if there were any service standards in place for their particular service, and what mechanisms were in place to monitor services on a service by service basis. So how would you know somebody didn't receive a response, which I think is what drove us doing this piece of work in the first place. Often queries are passed on to generic email inboxes, for example, planningadmin@cravendc.gov.uk. So we got a member of the customer service team to email all the generic email inboxes to check if there was an automated response in place, so that an individual will get a response. And Appendix A sets out the results of that research, which I think that appendix is self-explanatory. I'm presuming you'll have all looked through the results. So I set out the conclusions that sort of we came to as a result of looking at the research. I mean, I think something that overwhelmingly came across is there is no consistency really across the organisation in terms to how services respond to a customer query. And in a way, you would expect there to be differences between each service, depending on those that deal with high volume queries to services like economic development, where the contact officers tend to be on a more personal basis and are not as high volume as other services. So monitoring arrangements are not consistent either. But we have seen some good practices in environmental health, so we can build on those to look at putting something in place for other high volume services. And we also focused on trade waste queries and how we can use the CRM system to log and track those more effectively. And this will all lead to a better customer experience. Generic service email inboxes, yes, they're widely used, but they're not all set up with an automated response. So that's an easy thing to address. And again, there are no standardized service response times. So as Paul mentioned, we did have a customer service charter from a number of years ago. I think it is time that is refreshed. I think that was put in place in the days before email and social media was as widely used as it is today. So the new customer charter needs to reflect that. And we also need to recognise that for some services, they will have longer response times than others due to the high volume of queries that they receive, which is fine. We just need to make sure we publicise those service response times to help manage expectations of our residents. As Paul's already mentioned, I think we can look at key performance indicators and introducing some of those, particularly for high volume frontline services, so they can be monitored on a regular basis, and that will help to get a picture in terms of what's going on amongst the services. Because I think it's important to note, if service response times are slipping for any reason, there could be a whole variety of factors that lead to that may need further investigation, whether it's high workload or whatever. It's not just looking at things on face value. So in terms of the recommendations for improvement, the planning team, they use IT systems similar to environmental health, and environmental health use that system to help log customer contact, so they can track all the contact that a customer has had with the service. So a similar module is available for planning to use, and we've already kicked off a piece of work to look at how that can be implemented for the service. And so we're working with the planning admin team to put that in place. For waste management, we can look at how we use the CRM systems. And again, there are some quick wins we can have there, particularly how common problems are logged. And also for trade waste queries, how those are logged when they first come into the council. Developing the council-wide customer charter, I emailed around a first draft and would welcome any feedback that any of you may have on that. I just give the caveat that that also needs to be shared with service managers and get their input, because I've not had chance to do that yet, and I'll be doing that following the meeting, taking into account any feedback that you may have. And I think in conjunction with launching the customer charter, I think it's very important that, as well as launching the charter, we have some training for all frontline service in getting back to basics with customer services, to really re-emphasise the point that we are here to serve our residents. So it's fine having a charter in place, but we need to get every member of staff who deals with residents, members of the public, to live and breathe it and really understand why it's so important that we do give good service to our residents. I've already mentioned introducing some frontline KPIs, having automated responses, and I think it would be a really good idea to do a yearly mystery shopper exercise, just to do a sort of stock check once a year in terms of how things are going amongst the services. Is good customer service, once we put all these measures in place, is this still something that is being delivered?
And Chair, the last thing I would add, because that really is good detail on the report itself, is that actually I think scrutiny should receive that report on the mystery shopper annual exercise. Then you can see exactly how the services are performing across the piece, so to speak. So that will be an additional, if you like, addition to that. But I think that makes absolutely eminent sense, and we know how our services are then performing. We will know from the scrutiny, if you like, from the PIs, but I think that annual piece of work will be really good to come to scrutiny.
Thank you both. I mean, yeah, I think you make a very good point there. We obviously do have recommendation tracking at this committee, and we do get various other reports from the council's performance. So it would seem sensible to sort of bring that into the fold. You mentioned the slightly outdated customer charter that myself and Andy Soloway were talking about. We were sort of trying to rack our brains to remember exactly what it was, but quite clearly things have changed exponentially in the last 5 years, even in terms of how people communicate with the council, deal with the council, how indeed we as councillors communicate with our residents. So it would seem sensible to give it a closer looking at and try and bring things into the fold. Could I ask, without preempting to answer your question, do you feel or suspect that this slightly disjointed pattern that we've got in terms of the different departments' performance has been in any way, shape or form caused by the different computer systems that the different departments use, bearing in mind, as we say, people are, approaching the council in different ways. We do have different systems for different departments, don't we? Do you think that's had any bearing on it?
I don't think the different systems necessarily have a bearing. I think it's how the systems are used. So, for example, if we go back to the IDOCS uniform system that both environmental health and planning use, so if you get, for example, in environmental health, when someone rings up with an initial query, the usual process is a customer service advisor will log it on the system. We'll say we don't put calls direct through to environmental health officers to discuss because of the high workloads those officers undertake, and often they're out of the office, but they will log the query and expect for an officer to get back to you within 5 days. So it's very clear from the outset in terms of managing expectations and what our process is. And then environmental health can pull those calls down from the system, and then they can track that those calls are dealt with and the residents are responded to. So in planning currently, we don't have a system where, say if someone rings to speak to a planning officer, where a customer service advisor would necessarily log the call. They will forward details onto the planning admin team, who then forward them on to planning officers, but there's no way of recorded that that action has actually happened. So that's why we're looking at utilising the same system in a similar way, so you can have a record that tracks that query from start to finish and you can see what's happened to it. I think the biggest impact in terms of service response times is probably the pandemic, and officers working from home, and it may be being tricky to get hold of people, or you've got difficulties with IT systems or phones on divert or whatever. I think being realistic, that has probably had a bigger impact compared to the IT systems.
Yeah, Chair, I really fully agree with that. But this is about using what we've got smarter in reality. It's using, you know, the best use of the systems. It means we'll put a consultant in for half a day or whatever to work with planning, but it's worth it because it's that investment up front that saves time further upstream. And that's what this is about. And I've got to say, the way planning have responded to that has been exemplary. It really has. And the same with IT in order to facilitate that. So, and the same with the CRM system. It's about, they're there, it's about using them smarter. It's daft to me that we'll get a query in, that is then emailed from customer services to, say, waste management, who then enter it into the CRM system. Whoa, you know, we should have got rid of that 20 years ago. Not quite, but it's about working smarter with the systems we've got. And it doesn't matter that some of them are different systems at all.
That's fair enough. I mean, I tend to find the only issue you tend to have with the planning department is actually having enough planning officers, but that's another story entirely. Hopefully this might highlight that. Right, I've got Councillor Brockbank and then I've got Councillor Soloway, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I did a quick comparison of the old customer charter and the new the proposed customer charter that Sharon sent out earlier. I like the new one. It looks fresh and up to date, modern. And as you said, Sharon, there's you stripped out a lot of the stuff that isn't necessary now. One thing that the old one had in was handling of complaints. The new one, I couldn't see any reference to complaints at all, even to say, you know, there's a complaints procedure and you so if you have a complaint, follow that procedure, whatever. I think you've done the officers, I congratulate them. I think they've done a really comprehensive research on this, and I'm really pleased that you've spoken to all the different departments. And I do like the auto responses. The only thing with auto responses is they need to be followed up. And what I want to know is, how are you going to follow those up? Thank you.
I think.
Right, do you want to respond to that and then take Andy Soloway's, or do you want to take Andy first and then come back to both?
Well, shall I respond to Councillor Brockbank and then go to Councillor Soloway? So with respect to the customer charter and including a reference to the complaints procedure, I think that's a very good point. I think I didn't include it because I was aware that we have a whole separate complaints procedure, but we can put a line in to say, in dealing with complaints, refer you to the council's complaints procedure, and leave it at that. With reference to the auto response, again, I think this comes back to how calls are logged for the services. So I think we need to look at where there is an automatic response, how that is followed up and what monitoring procedures are in place. And that is maybe a separate piece of work that does need to be done.
I would just stress on that will be, you know, the service managers have to have that responsibility. Yeah. It won't be customer services, that will be the service managers.
Councillor Brockbank, is that okay? Have you got anything else to come back on that?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. It's looking very nice in the orangery. Yes. Andy Soloway.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, over this past year, with staff working from home, I've actually found response times to individual officers to be quite quick. I mean, very quick. I mean, literally yesterday morning, I had a couple of queries to do with waste management, and within an hour, someone had got back to me, and then they'd asked somebody else to contact me, and they contacted me today, and large, well, they did fully deal with what I was asking about, and so it was very quick, and I haven't really noticed that really changing. In fact, I think with some departments it's got even quicker. In fact, to me, so I will commend them for that, for managing not only working from home, but also for getting back to queries that could potentially have been lost somewhere along the way. I've always found it be good. Looking at the customer charter, I'm with Linda on this one. That the new one looks very much fit for purpose. The old one, I don't think it was, and I think thinking back historically to it, it was a long time ago. I think Chairman David Stavely rang me last night and said, "Can you remember having one?" And I said, "Yeah, we did have one, but it's back in the mists of time." We definitely did have one, but it sort of shows how little we knew about it, that we couldn't really remember it even. And this one, it fits very well, I think. I think it's good customer charter, and thank you for doing it. Good.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, it's good to see that despite, people who've been here far too long, like myself and Andy, who sort of remember these things, that we were sort of racking our brains about this. It's good to see actually that the work's already underway, because I'm taking it that this draft isn't something that you just pulled off the shelf. So that's good to see. I think it gives reassurance that it is an issue that obviously we are taking seriously as a council, because service response times has been a bit of a thorny issue for a while, hasn't it, in certain areas. So yes, I must admit, I'm very pleased to see it, and as been said by Linda and Andy, I think those the draft that you put forward does look pretty good. I've got Alan Sutcliffe next.
Yes, my query is in respect of planning, which you've dealt with as a generic department. But in planning, Sharon, there are two distinct types of calls. Contact with a planning officer may be desirable, but it isn't necessarily urgent, and a day or two would make no difference. On the other hand, contact with enforcement may be relating to something that's actually happening at that point in time, and maybe a request to get somebody from the department to go to a particular location and look at the problem. Is there any way that those two requests are treated differently, or are they perhaps following the same procedure?
They would follow the same procedure. I mean, as a matter of course, if a call comes into customer service, the customer service contact centre, and someone's wanting to speak to a planning officer about some generic advice, the customer service advisors would not put those calls through to a planning officer. They would advise about the planning duty officer service, or they would just say email the planning admin team. If you get a call from an individual about a live application, those calls would be put through to a planning officer. And so it will be put through to the direct line and then advised to leave a message if that person wasn't able to take the call. With regard to planning enforcement, again, the call would be forwarded to the planning enforcement team. I think the difficulty the customer service advisors have is if an individual isn't available to take a call, then they will advise they can leave a message on an officer's answer machine, but then we have no way of knowing at the moment if an officer then responds to the message left on their answer machine. So this is why we are working to use the uniform system. So when a call like that is put through, we can log the fact that the call's been put through, and so you have a record that that call has been made. And so the planning admin team will be able to pull off a check or pull off a report to see that those queries have been dealt with. So it's to assist officers, because I mean, I think if you've got someone who with a very high workload and is inundated with it's easy to overlook. You know, people are human, so it's good to have a record in place in terms of the calls that have been received and to check that someone has responded. I think that's the idea of utilising the uniform system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Obviously, planning is one of those departments that members of the public just can't get enough of. And as we've got a captive planning manager here, Neville, would you mind just giving me your thoughts on the proposals we're looking at, if you don't mind?
Thanks, David. Clearly, I can't get away from the fact that planning is rather high profile, be it enforcement or delivery of services and delivery of permissions. I think that the way we can move forward and the discussions I've had with Sharon over the last week or so about how to log stuff, inquiries that are coming through, I think is something that we can definitely work on and deliver a better service than we've done in the past. Because inevitably the case officers end up with high profile stuff, and there's an awful lot of pressure to say, why is my application not being dealt with today, yesterday, or tomorrow? Why is this enforcement investigation not happening now? Well, we're putting those processes in place. And to use the uniform system that I've been discussing with Sharon, over the last week, to actually be able to log that, gives us an audit trail that we can actually track. And the tracking system to me is incredibly important, because if you can actually track the inquiry coming in, work out where it's being transferred to, and thereafter, when the response was made, you can actually improve the service. And that's what, I think there is great opportunities to use the availability that is with us with uniform that we haven't used to the extent that is available to us, is something that we can definitely work with to deliver a better service.
Thank you, much appreciated. Clearly, sorry, Paul, go on.
Could I just add as well that, if this works correctly, it should help the individual officers as well. Because, you get the most inquiries when you haven't answered something, whether it hasn't been logged properly, whether the number's been taken, whatever. But that generates so much additional work, and not just for the individual officers, but across the board to other officers as well. So actually getting this right will assist the planning officers, will assist the other officers throughout the organisation. And that's the whole purpose of it. It's not for the sake of it. This is to show the public, this is the job we're doing. These are the timescales. This is what we seek to achieve. And it's to help the individual services and officers as well in the delivery of exactly that. And that is absolutely fundamental to me. It can't be for the sake of it. It's got two real purposes to it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can't help thinking that it also might be a useful way of us getting early signs that a particular department is under strain, stress, under-resourced, or what have you, for whatever reason that may be. Because obviously this is the sort of thing that people mumble about maybe to the ward members, and we maybe don't always have an ability to give them a coherent or accurate answer on this. But at least if it's tracked at a management level, we can start seeing the early signs of a problem in a given department. So yeah, it does look like a win-win, and certainly we're getting the right noises from the coalface. So thank you for that, Neville, much appreciated. I've got Councillor Brockbank, who I have a feeling is going to be red hot on this subject.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's about email addresses of officers who no longer work for the council. Those email addresses still appear to be live, and it's down to IT how and officers how you want to deal with that. But I've had many residents who, as you know, with a planning application, that they are allocated to a case officer. And those residents have been emailing case officers, and those case officers have left. And so they've been waiting for a reply for quite some time, not knowing that person has left. So can we have some way of, and it's entirely up to officers, either the email addresses are removed, or they are they redirect to the generic. If it, in the case of planning, it's redirected to the generic planning email address, or some sort of automated reply saying this person no longer works for the council. There needs to be something, because it's falling into a black hole.
Sharon,
Can
Paul, whoever's first, go on.
Sorry, I'm a bit. I suppose I'm a bit surprised, because we have a process in place when anyone leaves the council that you fill in a form and send it to IT, and then the email account is deactivated. So maybe there needs to be another process, particularly for frontline officers, where anyone emailing that address gets redirected to another officer. I know, giving Bruce as an example, his email address was live for quite a long time while he was off sick. So I just asked IT to put a redirect on, so that we could keep track of any emails coming into his account. So I'm sure there's something we can do with IT, another process we can put in place that any emails that are inadvertently received get redirected. I think that's quite a straightforward thing to implement.
Neville, were you going to say something?
Put on the levers form, actually. Sorry.
Right. So but it's something that at this moment in time we don't think is happening potentially. So Neville, if you've got to,
well, if I can just comment on that, there is a process that's in place that we activate with IT, and I've got great cooperation from the IT team. They did it literally within 30 seconds. I've got a team member who is on potentially long-term sick leave, and it got to the point where I was getting phone calls, complaints, whatever, saying I'm getting no response, because effectively the email address was dead and wasn't being responded to. And IT did, literally, it was a case of one phone call. It wasn't an email. One phone call said, please, can you adjust the email response onto this to either transfer it back to me or to the generic team of planning support. And IT did a brilliant job. It happened within 5 minutes. It might have been even less than 5 minutes. And that had the ability to, or IT put the ability to put a out of office inquiry or out of office response onto the email. That's where it would go to. And suddenly the complaints disappeared because they knew what had happened. So I think that is all in place. It's just a case of possibly not being automated, but human interaction of me telling IT that I've got a case officer that's out of action for the next 6 or 7 weeks, and please direct it all to that. So I think that's in place. That's not difficult. It does involve an element of either my involvement or any one of the rest of the team saying, please redirect it, but it should work.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like something that HR maybe need to sort of be on the ball with across all departments, as you say.
I think you could. Yeah, I think you could maybe just, we have a levers form as service managers that you fill in, and I think on that form you could just have a line, do you need to have a redirect for email? You know, and so at that point you can fill it in and then it'll be implemented along with everything else.
Well, we're obviously looking at recommendations. So are we thinking that would be something that we could add to that list of recommendations? Because it sounds like a backdoor to a customer service response. Our Chief Executive. Oh, hello.
Can I just quickly come back on that? I've just done a quick test to David Coates. Am I right, Neville, that David Coates has left?
No, David's
Is it David who's left?
No, David's still with me.
All right.
Just not available.
I've had some agency planners that have come and gone, but no, David's still with us. And
right, okay.
The automated response you get from David is that, you know, I'm working at home and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, and that's great. That's fantastic. yeah, that's the sort of thing that you know, that we need, really, isn't it?
Right. Paul, you unmuted yourself. You look like you were wanting to jump in there.
No, I was going to say, if you want to put it as a additional recommendation, that's fine. It doesn't have to be by any means, because I don't see it as rocket science to implement. I'm slightly surprised it's not already there.
Because that's it. That's why we need to make it as a recommendation. Our smartest rocket scientists overlooked that one, but anyway, we'll just add it in there just for good measure. Then we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's. Otherwise, Councillor Brockman could be losing sleep over this. Councillor Shuttleworth, whose reason for getting up in the mornings to do with building control and planning issues. What are you happy with what you're hearing? Because I know we've obviously had several discussions in other meetings and working groups about this sort of issue with the interface with the public. What's your feelings on this?
Yes, I think if the new system of logging things in with an appropriate response can be adequately implemented, then it's a good step forward. You'll have seen my reaction symbol, my thumbs up sign on occasions in the corner of my screen when other people have been speaking. I was just supporting the comments that have been made by fellow colleagues. I don't think I have anything really useful to add. It's possibly when people email an officer direct, then there should be some system. If they don't respond, it goes back to the central login system for the possibility of another officer dealing with it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because you've been on. I mean, in a previous life, you've been on the other side of this equation, haven't you?
I was before IT entered.
Yeah.
You know, long before. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was back in the days of telephones and notes and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no. I just wondered if it was passing the Shuttleworth test. And clearly, it is. Councillor Jackwin, would you like to mute yourself?
Got you.
Right, you're on.
Thank you. There's a mention in the report about certain services may also have statutory response times, which doesn't appear to get a mention on Appendix A. Are we all right for timing of responses for all services, or do we need to be aware that some services obviously are quicker than others? And I'm sure, Sharon, when you're going to respond by reprinting Appendix A with all the changes that we put on today, can you put the font size of Appendix A the same as the font size of the report so I can read it, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. I'm just conscious as well that we have the Vice Chair of Licensing here, Councillor Morby. Could I just ask, Chris, have you had any experience of your clientele in that department, in that field, having trouble getting hold of officers when need be, or the development department?
I haven't heard of anything, David, at all. No, I think they do very well, otherwise we would have been getting complaints. But no, none at all. And I haven't said anything because I'm quite happy with what I've seen so far, and everything's been addressed and moving the right way. So if I don't have to say anything, I don't anymore.
I was just interested to just get your brain about it. I was saying, because I know licensing involves taxis as well, which can be a contentious area, can't it, for various reasons?
It can, but I've never heard of anything. Usually it's the other way, where we are trying to contact the taxi operators and drivers. We don't get a response. So that's working the other way. Perhaps we should do a bit of a test on that side. But anyway,
Yeah.
We can't do anything about that, but yeah, it's usually that the other way around, David.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Right, I've got Councillor Soloway next.
I'm just sort of thinking, talking about different departments. Some departments have different pressures at different times of the year, and I suppose just my thought was that I'm sure we've thought about how those will impact on things and how we deal with that. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, when the new garden waste licenses go out, and there's sometimes people get muddled up, or they can't, you know, and people get a bit out, stuff like that. People tend to complain about the council when they get their council tax bills, because it's on the have this notion that they're paying for something that they're not getting, and there are those kind of seasonal things. And then the other thing that I suppose impacts is weather, because you'll have, you know, if there's really bad flooding, you'll suddenly be inundated by calls, and also people getting muddled up. They think that the council should be doing. Why hasn't the council gritted my street? Well, it's another council. So I think there's all. I think we have to be reasonably flexible in terms of seasonal variations on things. That's just my thought.
Yeah,
I think Councillor Soloway, with seasonal pressures, I think this is where we utilise members of the business support and customer service team. So a lot of the seasonal pressures tend to come direct to customer services and business support, waste management in dealing with the garden waste queries. So we are aware of seasonal pressures, and we will put, we're working more closely, I think as I've detailed in previous reports, with business support, so we can boost the number of advisors we have available to answer the phone and to try and cope with those pressures, particularly around the annual billing time. But those sort of issues tend to be dealt with direct by the customer service advisors, so they get a sort of immediate response from that team, which is a little bit different from, say, service specific requests like planning, that obviously has to be referred on to a service.
right. Thank you very much for that. Right, so if we've not got anything else from members, we have some recommendations here. Obviously, we've made a suggestion for an additional recommendation. Are members happy with what they see before them at 2.5 and the following points? Are we happy to take those on block? One thing that I'm just looking for there is this involvement of the lead members, and I'm not seeing that there. Do we feel that I would like to approach this, because I think it's important that we have got this ability, and obviously Paul's already made the case that, you know, we should be able to hold the lead members of the various departments to account. Do we feel we need to put something in there, or can we just take it as read that that's going to be part of the process, members?
I mean, I will, as a matter of course, following this, I can email lead members with a copy of the report and, you know, details of the recommendations of how we're going to be working across the council to make them aware. I mean, I'm happy if you want to put it in as a recommendation, but I will do that. But you might want to formally note that that piece of work is taking place.
Yeah, I think it just might help focus lead members' minds if they have it down as a recommendation.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, Paul, have you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, I think you should include the lead members, because I think they need to actually, a bit like the council plan, we say lead members to work with the officers to agree the milestones. And it'd be the same here. I think the lead members should work with the service managers, with the services, to identify, challenge the time. Don't just take it for granted, but actually, is that fair to the customer? Is that right for the service? You know, there are lots of nuances within. We've referred to statutory time periods. So there are lots of nuances within. But I do think it's helpful if the lead members agree them with the service managers, so it becomes a genuine charter across all the council members and officers, and the ownership is very clear, and we know who will be held to account.
Yeah, I think on that basis, I think I would like, personally, I'd like to see something in there then that we, you know, we bring the lead members into this process. Any comments, members of Councillor Jacquin?
When you reissue Appendix A with all the actions that are done after tonight's discussion, could you include a separate column that mentioned lead members for each service, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, members, on the idea that we put something in to Councillor Shuttleworth? I've got.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There's just one point that I'd like to air, and that's the acknowledgement of a complaint. We will try to acknowledge within 5 working days, acknowledge receipt of a complaint. Quite frankly, that's a long time. I would have thought 24 hours would be adequate to acknowledge receipt of a complaint, not to analyse it or anything like that, but to at least get back to the complainant and say, yeah, we've got your message, we're looking into it.
Yeah, that'll be 5 working days, which is basically a week, isn't it? So,
yeah. It's too long.
Sharon, what's your thinking on this?
No, well, in the new charter, we state that we will send an acknowledgement to a complaint within 2 working days, and we will aim to resolve the complaint within 5 working days. And then if the complaint is complex or can't be resolved, it'll be passed to the appropriate service manager for a more detailed response within 10 days. And I think that is quite realistic. I think as long as someone has an acknowledgement within 2 working days, I think that's fair. You can't necessarily, it depends on the complaint and what the issue is, but I think if you commit to trying to resolve it within 5 working days, but if you can't, you know, I think it's about keeping in touch with the complainant and letting them know where they are as you go through the process. But I think to acknowledge within 2 working days
is the point I was trying to drive home, and I'm sorry, but I overlooked that paragraph that Sharon's just highlighted.
Yeah.
No.
I don't know if you were referring to the old customer charter rather than the new one. I'm not sure.
No,
but there is a paragraph in the new customer charter.
Yeah.
No. As long as we've clarified that situation, I think, you know, quite clearly, you know, it's a point that's worth making, and we've got reassurance on that. Paul, are you?
Yeah, you could, Chair, you could just add in 2.52 another sentence which says each service to work with the lead member to agree the timescales or words to that effect involved, which then form part of the customer charter.
Yeah, I think that seems a reasonable way to put it. Have we got any concerns with that, members?
I'm sure Guy and Sharon will smarten up the wording, by the way, but it's the principle that's there.
We're getting some thumbs up, so we're not doing too badly. So yes, I think we'll take that. That seems a sensible way forward. So we'll move those recommendations on block. Do we need to take a vote as such, or are we happy to just take it as read and let you say otherwise?
I don't think we need to take a vote. The recommendations, if there's general agreement from across the committee, I think that's fine, David.
Yeah, no, that seems a sensible way forward, certainly. So really, that's the end of item 5. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance. Appreciated. We can go merrily bounding our way on to item 6 now, which is recommendation tracking. Now, who's presenting this one?
Well,
I'm not really presenting it, are we?
Yeah, I can give a brief. I can give a brief introduction. So the main purpose of the recommendation tracking is to look at progress that's made against recommendations from previous select committee reviews, which have then been approved by policy committee. So you'll note from the table that updates have been provided from bereavement service in relation to the reviews and bereavement services and also disabled facilities grants. So if you've got any questions or comments around that, then we can feed that back to the service areas. In relation to the reviews on development control and planning enforcement, there's still a couple of outstanding areas where members might want some further clarification. In view of that, Neville's very kindly agreed to attend this evening's meeting. So if you've got any points that you want to flag up, you want to raise on that, then that's in relation to the review on development control and planning enforcement. Hopefully Neville will be able to assist with that. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Well, members, any questions on our recommendation tracking? There's an awful lot of green, unfortunately a bit of orange, but there is some red, so I'm sure we'll have much to talk about. Councillor Shuttleworth, I'd like to kick off.
Yeah, thank you. As you might expect, I'd like to direct this to Mr. Watson in terms of planning enforcement, where we are. It's over a year since policy committee agreed in principle, but there was various concerns about funding for this, and I keep raising the issue. I raised it when budget consideration was given in the early part of this year. And I was told, well, no, there isn't anything specific, but we can always raise the money if we feel we need it. Well, I think we've gone on long enough to know that we do need it. And I'd like to hear what Mr. Watson has to say and whether in fact anything is happening with acquiring additional support staff for that function.
Thanks, Brian. If I can just come back on that. The situation is that obviously we've had one investigating officer who was on part-time work, who's now left us. We've got he's working full-time, but technically Owen Holmes is only on maternity. Well, no, he's not on maternity leave. He's covering maternity leave, but that maternity leave has now happened. And thankfully, the dear lady has had the rest of the family. So the plan of action is that we've got Leon as the team leader. Owen will, through change of circumstances process, will come off maternity leave that he's not on, but he will become a full-time enforcement officer. And we then end up with the enforcement officer who has which was only part-time, that left the authority, and the plan of action is to recruit to that as a full-time replacement. So we will end up with team leader, 2 full-time enforcement officers, 1 part-time enforcement officer, and the treason investigation officer as a package. So that's the plan of action for moving things forward. It doesn't go as far as I think this committee has looked at in the past, but then there was funding issues over being able to get 2 additional full-time members in. I think members will have to accept that we will still end up with under-resourcing and not proactive enforcement. It will still be reactive enforcement. But at least if we can actually get, well, not get, but put in place 3 full-time investigating officers, team leader and 2 others, I'm sincerely hoping that things will be proactive. Well, proactive is the wrong word. That we will be able to react more effectively and more efficiently to enforcement investigations that are put forward.
Right, thank you. Can I ask another question then? A suggestion to throw into the mix. What about the possibility of development control officers, when they're out and about, just keeping an eye on any developments that are being granted consent as they're in the vicinity, just to make sure that things are developing in a satisfactory manner, and that there are no glaring issues which deserve enforcement. And if there are, don't report them back. Because an awful lot of what I see seems to happen is enforcement, as you rightly say, it's reactive, and sometimes it's well down the line. These problems have occurred weeks ago. They haven't come to light until someone has suffered a problem, whereas someone who's on top of the game can identify the imminence of that problem before it had got greater impact. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are. Rest assured, the development management team do not drive with blinkers around them. They don't just go and look at a job and ignore what they've looked at before. And there is a significant number of enforcement investigations that are triggered by the development management, development control team, because they're the eyes on the ground that have dealt with the application, come back to the office and go, Leon, I've just driven past the site that I dealt with at whatever, be it Shires Road. I can keep on naming them, Brian. You know them.
Yeah.
That they will come back and say, I've just driven past this, or had a look at it, and I stopped and had a look at it, and I think there's an issue in this. Shall it be moved forward to investigation? Now, the only difficulty that there isn't any problem with that process. The difficulty comes back to resourcing the whole issue, because what I would like to move forward to in a more positive vein is to end up where the enforcement officers and investigating officers identify a breach of control, and thereafter they deal with the planning application that seeks to rectify the unauthorized development. Because why duplicate things when they've done the investigation? We identify and tell a developer that they are in breach of planning control and they need to make a planning application. Why throw that back to the development management team when the enforcement team have actually already done 2/3 of the investigation and can deal with it relatively quickly and swiftly? Conversely, there are situations where there is a need to actually pass that on because the resource of the enforcement team is such that it can't actually cope with dealing with applications that are retrospective. I mean, that's the way that I would like to work towards, but that comes back to a resourcing issue, because if you've got the investigating officer going out there, identifying the breach, trying to resolve it by negotiation where appropriate, trying to be in a position to do it where you say this is sorted out. But the other side that the development management team could, under pressure, take on is that if the case officer that has dealt with the original application goes out on site, drives past it and thinks there's something not quite right with them, rather than throw it back to the to the enforcement team, that they actually take on that sort of enforcement role.
A dual role.
A dual role, yeah. And I'm looking towards a one team solution rather than thinking we've got separated. We're one team. We're not three. It's not the spatial planning team. It's not the development management team. It's not the enforcement team. We are the planning team, and it's working together. And that's what I'm wanting to aim towards, to deliver a better service across the board.
Right. What about other authorities? Do they have dual functions, or sometimes separate development control and enforcement? Or
I think I can answer that. In all the authorities, well, in my 31 years at Harrogate and other authorities that I've worked alongside with, generally the enforcement team is a specialist team. And the reason why they're a specialist team is what members don't see, and this is maybe something that I need to think about reporting to members, is how many investigations are actually resolved without formal action. You know, I mean, the greatest enforcement team managers and leaders that I've worked with have been ones that go out there and solve the problem without it becoming formal.
Yeah.
But that takes a hell of a lot of hard work, research, commitment, and ability of the staff that you've got in place. But the best enforcement officers that I've ever worked with are the ones that solve problems without it becoming an enforcement issue.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, you know.
No, but it's a good aim, isn't it?
Well, the guy who builds the castle, as I think you saw as the enforcement training, the guy who built the castle inside a pile of hay bales was always going to end up as a mega enforcement issue. The ability to actually get an enforcement complaint in where the enforcement officers go and negotiate the solution. Look, guys, you're a bit out of order on this. Get your act together and do something. That becomes a closed case to us because we've solved the problem. And that's what, you know, that's the ability of enforcement officers, is the ability to negotiate solutions.
The persuasive personality.
Yeah. And the greatest ones can do it very easily.
Yeah.
And the easiest bit is, well, let's just log it, book it in, and turn it into something formal. But I think that's something that members, and I think it's something that I should think about talking to Linda as you as planning committee chairman and the rest of the planning committee, is how much work is actually done in the background that isn't registered, but it then comes around to registration, inquiries and complaints, is how many cases are actually resolved before they become anything formal, and it just becomes a case closed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Noel, can I just ask, because obviously we're talking about the recommendations that we had and all the rest of it. You've outlined the structure that you're looking at in enforcement. Have you included in that structure any potential modern apprentices, or is that not something that's on the menu at the moment?
That's not menu at the moment. There may be scope for doing that. In some respects, I'm fully signed up to apprentices and their ability to be trained and moved into things. Enforcement is a very sensitive position because it can get confrontational, and it's not easy to actually get someone in an apprentice situation in what can be confrontational positions, and you need experience, you need communication ability, and I'm not writing off the option of being able to look at the possibility of including apprentices in that position, but enforcement is a very hard, cold face, and what you can't do is end up spending 12 months with the team leader, you know, holding hands with an apprentice, albeit I wouldn't write that off by any stretch of the imagination.
I was thinking more really, if it was the case that you could get somebody in the back office functions initially, you know, as sort of help out in that respect. As you say, you can't be throwing them in at the deep end, you know.
Well, I think the increased use of the enforcement IDOC system is that if there was a need for, which is why we've actually sort of Sam, who left us, She was only part-time, but she left us. She was employed in a way in an administrator to the enforcement team. But the enforcement team, with some fine-tuning on IDOCs and uniform, doesn't need an administrative function, but I would be more than happy to continue that discussion with Leon and the team if they could take their admin function into an apprentice role in addition to the direct investigators. It's definitely something that I would welcome member support for doing that option.
Yeah, I'm just mindful that, you know, if you've got, you know, capable enforcement officers, the less time that they're spent doing slightly less demanding elements of the work, the more time we can spend actually doing the job of enforcement. And certainly that's something that might be beneficial. I don't know, members, do you have a view on that idea or principle of maybe us making a noise towards CLT that we need to do something on this front? Got all volunteer at once. Councillor Brockbank.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree. I think anything that can relieve the enforcement officers is a good thing. So I would certainly support that.
Yeah, I've got some thumbs up from Councillor Morby, Councillor Shuttleworth, and Councillor Solway nodding there. Councillor Sutcliffe, what's your view, having been in this field?
I would support it in principle, but I do think that Neville's right that if you have the wrong type of individual in there, ostensibly trying to help move things along, if he's not experienced and qualified, he can actually make the situation worse rather than better. And it then requires a qualified officer to go in and try and receive the situation.
Yeah, I think certainly, as you say, the more demanding technical side of it is not necessarily appropriate, but the idea that I think we would be taking a compromise position here by saying that, you know, obviously we haven't been, our recommendations haven't been able to be met, but we feel that this might be something that could be looked at or should be looked at maybe in terms of trying to make what resources enforcement have got more effective. Would words to that effect work for members?
I think the fact of the matter is, Chairman, that it's a very intensive, and to do it effectively, you need a big labour force. If the planning officers were to divert from their normal duty to look at every site that's been approved, bearing in mind you're probably talking about 900 applications in 12 months, you'd find that on practically every site there have been minor indiscretions, if you like, deviating from the original planning consent. But you've got to look at the benefit of pursuing enforcement against the cost of enforcement and the implications on the processing of other applications. I don't know if Mr. Watson would agree with me there.
Well, he's indicated to speak, so Neville, if you'd like to.
Yeah, if I could just respond on that. I mean, what I would like to be in a position to do is have as many experienced investigating enforcement officers out on the ground, looking at things and sorting things out. And if that, as a result of that, if that means that it releases them from any administrative process back in the office that could be filled by an apprentice, I welcome that, you know, hands down. You know, let's go for it, because enforcement is so, it's so difficult, it's confrontational. You've got an upset developer who's carried out something that they believe isn't right. You've got a complainant who is objecting to what has gone on, and the human relation bit of enforcement is immense, and the challenges that are in there. So I wouldn't disagree, Alan. If we can get more people out on site to actually do the investigation and do the move towards from the reactive to the proactive, great. And if a recommendation from this committee is that it needs, as we've come down from the 2 that we were thinking about when we had the working group and then went to policy committee, but there was the financial implications of all of that. If an option is to provide support back in the office to get the investigating officers out of the office, well, are we moving in the right direction?
Neville, I think certainly I'm minded to go for the recommendation that we should be putting forward that basically covers what we've said. We feel that we're acknowledging that the financial pressures meant that our original recommendation was not possible to be met, but we feel that a sensible solution in terms of making the most of what resource we are able to deploy would be to give some modern apprentice style business support for the back office functions of enforcement, which would mean, potentially an extra member of staff, but not the higher pay grade member that we were sort of originally suggesting. Go from there. Have we got as any objections to that if we were to sort of move that forward as a recommendation to the leadership? That's looking like everybody's happy with that. So, Guy, if that's all right, we could sort of organise something along those lines. You can sort of let me know how you want to do it.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it will be something that will probably need to go back to policy committee, I would have thought, at some point, but we can work through the arrangements for that. That's fine.
Right, excellent. Okay. So, members, are there any other areas of our action tracking that you wish to raise? I mean, I think we've done the building control bit pretty well now, unless there's anything else that you wish to bring up. No, the head of planning shaking her head. That's a good start. So is there any other items that you wish to discuss on the recommendation tracking? No, we're happy with that. I mean, obviously there's some issues surrounding the disability grants, isn't there? So any comments on those? Councillor Shuttleworth.
Can we just go back about building control? It's a procedural matter, really. But Guy and Hannah are aware we haven't actually confirmed the recommendations from the last working party.
No, that's if I can just come in at that point, we've just not had an opportunity, unfortunately, within the team to complete the review on that. I think the intention was to bring that back to today's this evening's select committee meeting. I've not been in a position to do that. I would like to present that review to select committee, either at the committee or via an email for you all to approve, which we can then present to policy committee, because it does need to be included, I think, as part of a review document. There's quite a lot of work went into that, and I think rather than just come up with a recommendation, I would like to submit a review for the committee to consider. But as soon as we get the opportunity to do that, we are working on it at the moment. We'll
oh yes, I'm not being critical. I understand that, but if it could be done by agreement through email rather than waiting for the next select committee, at least it gets things moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll endeavour to do that. That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Right. Well, I think, Neville, will not take any more of your time because it's good of you to come along. I think we've covered the building control issues on our recommendation tracking. Unless there's anything else, Councillor Shuttleworth? No. Just checking. So, yes, thank you for your time. We will make a recommendation. Whether we get anywhere with it or not, we'll find out in due course, no doubt. But thank you for your attendance. Much appreciated. Members, is there anything else that we wish to raise? No. So with that, Guy, I think we've actually finished agenda item 6 as well. So, any other items of business? I don't think we've got anything at this moment in time. I'll just ask if members have got anything they wish to raise. No, they all look like they're dying to get off and watch something on television. Can't imagine. So date and time of the next meeting. We're looking at Wednesday, the 23rd of June at 6:30. Is that okay, members? Assuming we've got plenty to talk about then, I'm sure we will. I'm assuming Brian's studying his calendar.
I am.
I could tell. You had that look about you. Councillor Brockbank.
Can I ask, if it's the 23rd of June, will we be all meeting in person? What sort of meeting will it be? Do we know?
That depends on the High Court, doesn't it? In 21st of April?
It does indeed. I must admit, bearing in mind quite a lot of our work is done as working groups, my inclination is to offer members the option, if it's possible, of remote work, of remote meetings still. Because obviously the requirement to meet in the chamber would be for official meetings, not necessarily working groups, as I understand it. I don't know, Guy, if you've got any better knowledge on this, but I certainly will be quite happy for members to work remotely, because I think it's the most sensible way forward. The world of business has embraced it. It seems ridiculous that the world of politics has been unable to. Guy, have you got anything to add?
Just that, as you've already mentioned, there's the High Court challenge later in the month. I think it's 26th or 28th of April, to determine whether we're meeting face to face or whether we can continue to meet virtually. I think after that, if we do continue to meet virtually, there'll need to be discussion in any event about how committees wish to meet, whether it's done sort of virtually, or whether there's a hybrid approach that's adopted, or whether we go face to face. So I think chairs of committees will have different views. I think some committees may work better face to face. Some committees might work better virtually. So I think it's a conversation for chairs and committee members to have when we get to that point.
Councillor Soloway.
Yes, Chairman, I raised this at group leaders meeting today, and yes, there is this court case. But however, whatever happens with this court case, the 23rd meeting will be after the 21st of June, which is when restrictions are supposedly going to be completely eased. So it does fall out of fall into that time scale, assuming as usual caveats on that. I mean, personally, I'm with you that when we're talking about having working groups and bringing a saving of money for the council and having people, less of a carbon footprint, to have a working group is much more amenable to do it on virtually, as indeed I think even select committee itself. I think the problem is going to be with full council meetings, but then the problem is going to be accommodating numbers of people. We usually, our select committee meetings, there's 12 members, plus we usually have at least 5 or 6 officers in attendance. That takes you to quite a number of people. I really do hope this court case is successful, and we don't go back to physical meetings until the roadmap allows it on the 21st of June. And even then, be flexible about it.
Yeah, I think flexibility is the key. You all seem so engaged when you're sat in the comfort of your own homes. Although I'm not so sure Councillor Brockbank might be nodding off there. Councillor Sutcliffe.
Yes, Chairman, everybody's watching this case to see what the outcome is.
You've muted yourself, Councillor Sutcliffe.
Right, you should be able to hear me now, Chairman.
Yeah, indeed.
No, obviously it depends on the outcome of this case, but my understanding, and somebody can correct me if I've got it wrong, is that if the case is lost, that it will become a legal requirement to have face-to-face meetings, and we won't have a discretionary authority to decide whether a particular committee wishes it or not. Perhaps Guy can comment on that.
No, I mean, as I understand it, the case is actually a challenge to say
A
that
challenge.
the government have the jurisdiction to do this, because what they're saying is that they can't get it on the statute book to actually, pass any laws because they haven't got the time for it in the schedule. But this challenge is saying that, well, actually, you don't need to pass any more laws because you already have the right, you already have the laws in place to do it. So it's a slightly strange situation in so much as it's not quite a black and white court case, not that there ever is one, but yeah, it would be then a case of, if it was proven the case that they're bringing, that, where the government would then be inclined to do it. You would hope so, but for some reason, seem hell-bent on the idea of everybody getting back into the same room. Clearly, they don't have to travel the same distances we do. But anyway, we shall see where that goes, and you will all be duly informed before the 23rd, no doubt. So, if we were happy with the time and date of the next meeting, if not the format, I think we'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance, much appreciated. Thank you, Neville, for your attendance, appreciated. And we shall all speak to you very soon, probably tomorrow night. There's a thought. So,
Yes.
I'll be